Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so first of all, as I mentioned yesterday, this Friday I'm going to be doing a show in Los Angeles. If you're in LA, come by K-Town, a place called Thai Angel. I'm going to be doing some freestyling, some chatting with the crowd, as well as performing some tracks. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, if you like the music and want to see me do a kind of live pod style thing, come through. It's a free show, great lineup, should be a great time. So aside from that, Joe Rogan had Jim Breuer on his podcast, which isn't really that surprising. They've been friends for a long time. Jim Breuer has become one of the most cringe and one of the most hack comedians really anywhere, at least that has a name. So he fits perfectly within the Joe Rogan world, although admittedly he has a much larger audience. He's been building his audience for a long time, as well as very effectively marketing himself towards the right-wing, reactionary side of the spectrum, especially around COVID. He started talking about vaccines and Fauci, doing literally some of the worst stand-up you will ever see about those subjects, and, you know, really has established a second leg of his career doing that. He was not doing as well before he came out making jokes about Fauci. So it's clear indication that he's just appealing to a certain audience, and he's still doing that. So the most newsworthy thing that they talked about here is that Joe Rogan says that Marc Maron apologized to him. And we'll get into the specifics a little bit. He does not tell a super clear story about what happened. Maybe we'll hear more about it. I doubt Mark will say anything at this point, but I guess we'll find out. So here is Joe Rogan talking to Jim Breuer about that. They had a whole long, they talked about AI and everything that Joe Rogan normally talks about. I'm skipping over all of that. We do not need to listen to Joe Rogan and Jim Breuer talk about politics because it's all about what you would think it is. But here is them not only talking about him and Marc Maron, but he also compares it to the situation with Carlos Mencia many years ago when Joe Rogan called out Carlos Mencia. So I thought that was a very interesting comparison. So here's that.
So here's an interesting thing. I should tell you because you know this person.
Okay.
I actually made up with Marc Maron the other day. We actually had I had to help him with something. I had to inform him about something, and he sent me a very sincere message of thank you. And then I sent him a message back that was sincere. And I said, look, I'm not your enemy. And I'm sure if we saw, despite our differences, I'm sure if we saw each other, within a few minutes, we'd be laughing and smiling.
Yes.
Which is generally how I interacted with him, for the most part. I had only a few bad interactions with him. And he was pretty honest about how, you know, maybe it's his own mind. And, you know... It was a very sincere interaction, which made me happy. It's not good to have enemies, man.
No, it's really not.
It's not good.
I've had maybe 2 or 3 that have vocally put out on, because I'm not into the Twitter insulting or going on other programs insulting. If you have an issue, tell me.
Right.
And then we'll deal with it the way
call me up.
The real humans do it.
Yeah.
And when that whole thing, I have a funny feeling. I know it. Some of his issues were, but I felt, and I put it out there. I felt bad because for years I didn't have great interaction. When I started, listen, I'm not poo-pooing or whatever, but yeah, a lot of guys didn't like me. They were like, who's this animated, loudmouth kid coming in here, confident and blah, blah. And he would always kind of like, I'll never forget, he'd be like, you gonna woo him? You gonna woo him tonight with your...
He was trying to sabotage you.
Without doubt.
It was a competition thing.
Without doubt. And I understood that because I'm still back then.
You made a whole video about it.
Correct.
Yeah, I saw that video.
And so as we went on, I actually was so happy for him once he got WTF, because you saw like, wow, he
became a different person.
And he found his niche.
And he became friendly.
Correct.
He was easy to be around.
Yeah.
His podcast was killing it, and then he had his show on the IFC.
Yes.
Maron. He was doing great. He was way easier to hang around with.
He was incredible.
Because all the angst had been removed, and he'd become a made man, right?
Made man.
Yeah,
and
he'd
when
become
you're a made
legit.
Man, who cares who else is becoming
exactly,
who cares?
Exactly. But then when things go south, then it's hard to maintain that same mindset. It's very easy for me to say, oh, just relax and who cares? Everybody should be happy that all these people are doing well. But if you're not doing well, that jealousy is a natural thing. I've experienced it before. I've experienced it. I know the feeling. I've experienced it for brief moments before. You know, even like, 8-9 years ago, maybe even. It's like there's moments where someone's really killing it. You're like, oh, what the fuck? But then I realized in my head, like, God, that's a bitch ass way of thinking. Don't hold on to that. You need those people that make you feel uncomfortable. They make you feel like, fuck, I got to go to work.
Yes, and whether it's him or whoever, it doesn't even have to be the comedy world. It's just the world in general. It's not that sad. I wish sometimes people in those positions, no matter how successful you are and whatever you define as success, if someone else is starting to kill it somewhere, let them. Keep your eyes off that. Just stay in your own lane. I hate that term though. I've heard that. Yeah, it's not stay in your lane. It's stay in your world of confidence. And I saw a couple people try to take a swat, and I think it was deeper than that. I think it was A, they were envious, and B, because you had certain people on, and perhaps they were angry because they're still lumped into how they define themselves to certain gangs that their allegiance goes to.
Yeah, ideological capture.
100%. Yeah. How dare he have...
Don't platform that person.
Don't platform this one, and don't platform that one, and don't platform... And matter of fact, I would even hear chatter like this. I would never... And I'd go, yes, you would, because...
Well, if you wouldn't, then you would never be me in the first place, so what are you worried about? They think that they're going to diminish that by attacking you. But that's what they don't understand is when you do that publicly, the heat comes for you. Because now you've set the game in motion. Now you start moving pieces around the board, and then people are starting to move pieces against you. And that's I felt that even at a time where I felt it was necessary, like the whole Carlos Mencia thing. I said that to my friends afterwards. I said, I don't think I'll ever do anything like that again, because just the negative, even if it was only 10% of the people that were negative, 90% were positive, that 10% is just not a good feeling. It's a terrible feeling. It's not good. Even though I thought that was a necessary thing to do, because not just him, but I wanted to expose the way the business was treating that, where they were profiting off of it and openly covering it, and they knew about it, and they thought it was just business. Like, that was what my agent said to me. It's all right, just so business.
Joe's take, since this whole thing started, is that it's fully fueled by jealousy. Marc Maron is a jealous person, and so that's the only reason he's saying this stuff in the first place. And then he connects that with the fact that WTF isn't doing that well as a podcast anymore, and so that makes Marc Maron feel like he has to start lashing out at other comics again. He does have a history of doing this, and even Jim Brewer said that, he made a little comment to him early on in his career, you're gonna woo him. And that's really the talent of Marc Maron when it comes to these type of interpersonal conflicts. He's really great at saying like one little thing that totally sticks in someone's head like forever. So many of the people airing out whatever their previous beef with Marc Maron may have been, it's always about like one little comment that they really remember. And I'm sure there's other things that he said as well, but that's kind of what he would use his talent for, is to craft the perfect scathing insult. Not just one that is mean and effective, but something that forces you to wonder, what did he mean by that? So Joe Rogan's recounting of this, however reliable it may be, is that he reached out to Marc Maron to help him with something. So he says, I had to help him with something. So to me what this says is that Joe Rogan reached out to Marc Maron of his own volition. He said, I had to inform him of something. It's a little vague. That could be anything. To me, what it says is that he let Marc Maron know about something that might affect him, something related to business, something related to drama, and because Joe Rogan genuinely went out of his way to try to look out for Marc Maron, despite the fact that they're having this beef, he says Marc Maron got back to him, apologized, was very sincere, and even said, oh, it was all in my head the whole time, or maybe it was all in my head. So I don't know that I buy that. It's not like it was based on nothing. They were not just talking about interpersonal stuff here. Like, Marc Maron had a great point against Joe Rogan. And so that's really why it got so much attention, not because it was just lame drama. So the idea that Marc Maron wouldn't follow up on that at all and say anything about why he came after him in the first place, I find unlikely. He probably said something like that. And it also doesn't sound like Joe Rogan showed any contrition back. But the core of this issue is the politics of it. It's not the interpersonal thing. And Joe Rogan, from the beginning, has turned it purely towards the interpersonal. He doesn't really want to talk about the political aspect of it at all. So it's a shame that seems like it has worked. It seems like not only has he been able to keep up that narrative on his own show, but Marc Maron kind of caved and was like, yeah, well, maybe it is my own thing, at least enough so that Joe Rogan went on his podcast and said that. But taking Joe in good faith on this and saying that it went down exactly the way he said it did, I can see Joe being genuine and reaching out to him about something that he thought he could help him with. And maybe it was something that Maron genuinely appreciated and needed, and so it made Maron say, maybe this guy isn't such a bad guy, maybe I've been a dick. But it's kind of a shame that Joe Rogan gets to get out of that situation, come out of it, without ever having to acknowledge the criticism that Marc Maron was making in the first place. I don't care about their interpersonal drama. I don't care about comments that Marc Maron has made to Joe Rogan or their history. What matters is the politics, and not only with his criticisms of Joe, but his criticisms of Theo Von, which made it into Marc Maron's recent comedy special. Marc Maron was spot on. And because of Marc Maron's past behavior and the fact that he has a tendency to be jealous and selfish and kind of small-minded like that, that's how Joe was able to frame it that way. Like, there's no substance to this critique whatsoever. And that's just obviously not true. And now Marc is kind of out of the game, so he's not going to be able to make that case anymore. But the reason it's a shame is because Marc Maron was one of the few people who could make that critique in a way that would actually affect Joe Rogan and knock him off his balance a little bit. And that's exactly what it did. So maybe Marc felt like that was enough and that he accomplished what he set out to, or to the extent that he even wanted this to be a thing, it became too much and he didn't want to be a target anymore over this. And that's a little bit what Joe Rogan says, is that when you put that negative energy out there, it comes back to you. All of a sudden, you got all these right-wingers who are being negative to Marc Maron. Now, that's really just the way the internet works nowadays. If you take a strong stance on anything, especially if you go after somebody who you genuinely think is in the wrong, people are going to come after you, and it's endless. So what it comes down to is you really got to believe in something. That's what I've come to feel about the current age. You got to believe what you believe, put it out there, and stand on it. But Joe makes this comparison to the Carlos Mencia thing, and I think this is a really, really interesting comparison, because other than the actual substance of what these two figures are doing, Carlos Mencia and Joe Rogan, it's different, but the dynamic of the situation is the same. So Carlos Mencia was a huge comic at the time. Joe Rogan hadn't been famous really. I think he had done Fear Factor at that point, but was really just kind of in the comedy world, making a name for himself. And so he saw an opening to go after Carlos Mencia, and he also felt that it was an important thing to do. So it's possible, even likely, that there was a part of him that felt like he was going to raise his profile by doing that, and he did. Really, the only reason anyone cares about Joe Rogan at all is because he did that. Because not only did he call out Carlos Mencia and kind of seemed heroic in the moment, but he also kind of shined a light on that scene and just made it a lot more interesting to people. So then when Joe started doing his podcast, having people like Ari Shaffir and all those LA comics on, it became a thing that people were invested in, and people came to trust Joe. So that's an important thing, that people trust Joe to be honest, at least about what he thinks. So when he says that the reason I felt like I had to do that about Carlos Mencia is because I saw that the business was normalizing what Carlos Mencia is doing. They viewed this as a legitimate way of making money, and hey, just don't worry about it. This is just business. This is how it goes. So Joe said, that is not how I want the business of comedy to be done, and I'm going to try to make a dent in that. And he did. He did make a dent in that. It's good that Joe Rogan did that to Carlos Mencia. It's probably also true that Joe Rogan invited some negativity into his aura, but the point is that the world is materially better, especially the comedy industry, is materially better because Joe Rogan did that. And his intention to make it so that that wasn't normal in the business world of comedy was successful. And even if he took a lot of negativity from that, more than he's saying, he didn't even say he took that much negativity, but he said the small amount that he got made him feel terrible. But the thing is that when it comes to standing for something and believing in something, right? Joe Rogan's passionate about comedy, let's say. And so he feels that he doesn't want to see the comedy industry become something that is overrun with thieves, people who are greedy capitalists, who are okay, not just with thievery, but with bullying and sort of sweeping people under the rug. Joe saw that becoming more normal. He realized he could do something about that, so he did it. Now, I'm struggling to see how that's different when it comes to the dynamic of the situation here. Marc Maron sees that what Joe Rogan is doing is normalizing figures like Donald Trump, and that's exactly what his bit about Theo Von was, that by having certain people on the podcast and having casual conversations with them, you're normalizing their worldview, and in the case of a politician who's a part of a heated race, right at the end of the race, you're actually materially helping that politician. So Maron sees that there's a material effect here, and he brings it back to comedy to say that, I see this happening in the world of comedy, and it's becoming something that comedy isn't supposed to be. Comedy is becoming adjacent to these politicians, and it's becoming a way for them to leverage not just themselves into power, but to leverage an incredibly noxious form of politics that Joe Rogan has let slip right past him on his podcast over and over again, and it's become a baked-in part of his programming. So then they say this thing about worlds, right? He says, I don't get why you have to be so upset that somebody else is succeeding. Stay in your own world. Now that's interesting phraseology, because that is not only part of Marc Maron's critique, but also when Marc Maron referenced the Elephant Graveyard video that was made about Joe Rogan, which was part of this whole growing critique against the Austin comedy scene. A lot of that is the fact that they've created this walled off world where they are just talking about their version of politics, their version of reality. They're spreading it to millions of people, some of which who already agree with it and are becoming more convinced, others who don't agree with it and don't know much about it, but are hearing things that they wouldn't have otherwise heard in a very credulous way. So what Joe is doing when it comes to Trump is actually very similar to what Mencia was doing, because in some ways he's degrading the art form of comedy by associating himself with that. And I would say that both Joe Rogan and Jim Breuer are pretty terrible comics who have gotten very good at the art of performing. And Jim Breuer has had a long career as being a very good comic. But at this point, if you don't agree with what he's saying, if you're not already ready to hear the things that he has to say, it kind of just falls on deaf ears. And to me, that's not good comedy. But the performance of it and the fact that he has all of this like muscle memory of how to make people laugh helps when it comes to having good shows. And I think Joe Rogan has an aspect of that too. It's why Joe Rogan is so animated on stage, even though he's not that good at that. It certainly doesn't come as naturally to him as Jim Breuer. It's a little cringe, but I think it works for him. It helps him to get a crowd excited. So by laundering this right-wing politics through comedy, they're kind of debasing the art form. And that's where you can say, well, if that's your cup of tea, fine. But by having somebody like Trump on your podcast and letting them talk past you, essentially Trump is stealing from you. He's stealing your credibility, because Joe Rogan has built up credibility over the years with his audience, starting with the Carlos Mencia thing, but through years and years and years of talking about things in a way that feels honest. And so when Trump comes on your podcast and he's not honest, he's a dishonest politician. If we know anything about Trump, we know that. So he comes on there, he tells all kinds of lies. Rogan, Theo Von, Schultz, all three of these guys, Trump told lies directly to their face. Things that he said on those podcasts turned out to not be true, not be his genuine intentions. So Trump stole from you. You lost credibility because of that, because Trump borrowed your credibility and he ran with it. So if that's not the kind of thing that should be normal, then it makes sense to call Joe out about it and let the chips fall where they may. If there's more negativity towards Marc Maron because of that, then that's just how it goes, because it's important enough that it matters to call Joe out on that. And making people see that it's not normal to do what Joe is doing with his podcast, having a guy like Trump on casually, it helps using some exaggeration of the figure of Hitler to make that point, that you're normalizing an incredibly reactionary, harmful ideology. But to Joe, it's completely normal, and it's completely middle-of-the-road politics. Joe still views himself as a centrist, and that's part of why his show has become so noxious, is because he's laundering a false sense of centrism to many people. A lot of what Joe believes in is very far right. So to call that out and to say this should not be the most dominant force in comedy, despite what capitalism thinks. Who cares who's the most successful? By Joe's logic, just allowing Carlos Mencia to continue to be successful and continue doing what he's doing, because that's his world, man. Why are you going to get involved in his world? Maybe it's not your cup of tea. So I wonder if Joe Rogan genuinely feels like, he says, I wouldn't do that again, but he doesn't say I wouldn't have done that if I could go back and do it over. So I wonder if he feels like he wouldn't have done that if he had the chance to do it over again, because that's really the key thing here. did it make sense to knock Carlos Mencia off his chair, even though you did it in a way that's not like the competition of capitalism? You got in there and you threw dirt at the guy, and it was true. Your critique of Carlos Mencia was true, and to this day, he still doesn't admit it, but that doesn't mean it's any less true. So anyway, I didn't expect to talk about this for that long, actually, but to wrap it up here, I think Joe Rogan kind of knows he's in the wrong here, and he's getting away with something by not having to acknowledge the political aspect of this. So the fact that Marc Maron backed down, maybe he doesn't want all this negativity and his retirement from podcasting, there needs to continue to be pushback against Joe Rogan, and this is an opening for people who have credibility in that world. You need to do the same thing. There needs to be more pressure on this guy, because ultimately the world would be better off if there weren't figures like him profiting and benefiting from, yes, platforming people who have an enormously negative effect on the world around us. Look around, man. Joe Rogan has admitted that Trump is not providing what he said he would provide, but he also is buying into these conspiracy theories one by one that are justifying it. So by the end of it, when it all comes out, said and done, Joe Rogan's going to be fully on the side of Trump again. So maybe the answer is to outcompete him in the marketplace of ideas, but I don't think that that can do it. And I think ultimately this guy's credibility has to continue to be chipped away at. And eventually his world and his audience, it's probably always going to be there, but it's going to fall back into its own space. And hopefully people who have talent and vision and believe in something more positive than what Joe Rogan believes in can not only take up more space on their own merit over time, but also continue to chip away at the credibility of this guy who really is doing it to himself. But if somebody doesn't put it out there, then he's going to be able to continue operating with impunity. So I think Marc Maron chipped the armor, but it does not seem like his attempt to knock the king off the throne was successful.
Me too close to, too much to do, the mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.